Good afternoon, everyone. It's noon Pacific. It's Friday. It's time for Relentless Learning. I'm your host, Larry Abke. I'm very excited about the program today. We do this most every Friday, and I'm very excited to have some folks with us for this live broadcast. And those of you who see us after the fact, we already have some comments in the comments. We've got Eduardo from California and Andy from San Mateo, just down the street from me. I'm from Burlingame. So welcome to the show live. And if you want to interact with us, the way that we do that is that you actually do put your stuff in the comments. And one of the things that we will do is you can put your questions in there and we'll answer them after the presentations. If you haven't been to Relentless Learning, I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what you're going to see today. We have two big ideas that we talk about on the show. Shehla Yamani will present. Before stepping into others' shoes, we must first step out of our own. I'm looking forward to her presentation. Previous to that, I'm going to present on scheduling for success, the role of cadence in optimizing value delivery, investment in cadence, actually. Next week, Marianne Dragonoff is going to present using Aaron Meyer's culture map to improve communication, collaboration in a cross-cultural environment. That's quite a mouthful. I was on Marianne's had a live show not too long ago for DevOps, and it was quite interesting. And I'm looking forward to him being a guest as well. So that's going to be next week. Relentless Learning is something we do most Fridays at noon Pacific. There's a few that we missed along the way, but it's almost every Friday, and you can join our mailing list, and I'm not going to spam you. I'll send you reminders every week of our guests and things that are coming up so that you know to be ready. And a lot of you I invite personally, and I thank you for joining us here today. And sometimes I invite you because I'm hoping that you will see the show and say, hey, I'd like to be a guest too. And we talk about how you can do that. This Relentless Learning is sponsored by the VUCA MBA. The VUCA MBA is something that I do. And the term VUCA is an acronym which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And MBA is not Masters of Business in this case, what it stands for is Mindset for Business Agility. If you have that business agility mindset, it's going to prepare you much better to thrive in the VUCA world, not just survive. So that's a big part of what I do, and that's my practice. And I encourage folks who are interested in bringing that to your companies that you reach out to me. And there's many ways that you can do that. I have a few special offers that I've done in some past seminars, so I figured why not make those available to the Relentless Learning audience. One is I have a book that I wrote recently and published recently, self-published, called Apke's Golden Rule of Agile, a focus on value delivery. There's a QR code here. You can take a picture of it. So if you don't get it right away, you can go back to the show later. You can take a picture of it. It's going to put you to this page. It looks just like this on the left. And then you can download the book. All we're going to do is get your name and email. And again, we're not going to spam you. We're just going to send you reminders about Relentless Learning. And you can unsubscribe at any time. A second offer that I want to make, which I've made at the seminars, which I think is pretty interesting, is I will do 1 hour free consultation with you and your team to assess relative value. It's something that I've done before. It's one of the things that I talk about, the main thing I talk about in Apke's Golden Rule of Agile book. So if you want to do that, this QR code will allow you to sign up for that. It will give you a Calendly link to set up a half-hour free meeting with me, and then we'll set up an hour that will allow us to, get the hour scheduled in advance, and I'll sit down with you and your teams for that hour and help you assess relative value. I do have a special seminar, so this is one of the things that I'm putting into the cadence when we talk about cadence of Relentless Learning. Every month, I'm going to have a special seminar. Last month it was about Apke's Golden Rule and value delivery. This month it's going to be about finance. How do we navigate finance in the VUCA world? I've found in my practice that we don't often spend enough time with the people who have control of the incentives of a system. So how do we do that? Some tips and tricks and things that I've learned over the years, things I've actually done in the real world. I'm going to bring that experience to you through the seminar. I think it will be something that will help you, whether you're a Scrum Master, Agile coach, or somebody in the world of finance. And then I put the links in the comments. So you all should have access to that. You should probably see it right now. There's a bunch of links in the comments on how to get a hold of me. And you can go straight to my calendar, set up a Zoom link. I love talking to folks about Agile. I'm very passionate about the VUCA world. I'm very passionate about my work. I'm very passionate about agility. So please take advantage of that. Without further ado, I want to seg into what I'm going to refer to as my big idea for this particular session. And for me, I'm a big believer in what I talk about sometimes with my teams called cadence and investment. And I like to use metaphors because metaphors are certainly ways to help us gain access to things that maybe we don't know and we want to learn. And saying something is like something else, using similes, metaphors, etc., are great ways to do that. One that I use quite often is the example, and I'll sit. Used to be, I almost said stand in front of people during my trainings, and I'll ask them a very simple question on Zoom. I'll say, raise your hand if you want to be fit and healthy. And the interesting thing about that is most people do. And then my next question is, okay, raise your hand if you went to the gym today, because that's certainly one way that we get fit and healthy. So eating right as well, but going to the gym is a big part. Exercise is a big part of getting healthy. And when I ask them that question, a lot of hands go down. And so I say to them, I say, look, if we're going to be effective in fitness, what helps is to set up what I refer to as cadence and investment. Cadence is about when we do something. So for instance, if I'm going to the gym, I should go to the gym maybe 5 out of 7 days, maybe Monday through Friday. And during those times I go to the gym, right, I have a cadence. I should have a certain time that I go. That makes it a cadence because it becomes easier. Maybe I'm one of those people who wakes up earlier then, and I go to the gym early. Me, I like to actually run. It's hard to tell from looking at me, but I do. And when I do that, I schedule that in the middle of the day, because that's the point where I might start to be slowing down. I need a little extra energy. So my cadence is to do that generally in between noon and 1. But once you have that cadence, the next thing you need to ask yourself the question is, okay, I'm going to do this, but how long am I going to do it? How much am I going to invest in this? What investment is necessary in terms of time? And certainly what we do for exercise in this case will determine sometimes that investment of time. But I don't think it happens by default. If you think about our world today, we have so many distractions, so many things that can take our time, and our time is really our most precious resource, folks. It's the only thing we can't make more of. Whatever time limit you have on your life, it's going to happen regardless of what you want. So time is a precious commodity. So time is an investment. So how much do I invest? Well, I take that same type of approach with some of my Scrum teams when I work with them. I'm not saying I force them to do it. I don't force anybody to do anything. I don't force anybody to do Scrum. But if they choose to do Scrum, I like to talk to them about cadence, and I like to talk to them about investment. And interestingly enough, for those who do Scrum, and one of the reasons that you do Scrum as a way to achieve agility is because it is written in the Scrum guide. So I'm thinking a lot of you are familiar with your Scrum folks, your Agile folks, you are familiar with the Scrum guide. In the Scrum guide, there are suggested time frames. If you haven't paid any attention, it's the last sentence. I mean, the Scrum guide gets smaller and smaller, but the suggested amount of investment is still in there. Now, I don't know what's going to happen when they update it for the next update. Maybe they'll get rid of it, but it's been there for a while. So I want to review the ceremonies and or events of Scrum, and I want to talk about what does the Scrum guide say about the time that we should be involved with it. Now, the interesting thing about the Scrum guide is the Scrum guide uses 1 month as the time frame. They're assuming 1 month sprints. And 1 month sprints is not something that most folks do these days. In fact, shorter sprints are probably better. The almost default amount of time that people spend in sprints these days is 2 weeks. So I'm gonna translate what they have to say into 2 weeks. Obviously, you're smart enough. You probably do better math than I do. You could translate it into a week if you choose to do it. If you're doing 3 weeks, come talk to me. That's an anti-pattern. A lot of teams do 3 weeks because they do 2 weeks of development and then 1 week of QA. That's not what you should be doing. So if you're doing 3 weeks, chances are it's probably anti-pattern. Come talk to me about that. But I want to look briefly about the various events and ceremonies, and you all know them. There's only a few. That's the beauty of Scrum. One of the things that's good about Scrum, and it's good because you don't have a whole bunch of things. It's lightweight. But the daily Scrum is suggested as up to 15 minutes per day. We all know that. So if I do the math, 15 minutes per day for a 2-week sprint is 2.5 hours. So just to do the daily Scrum over a 2-week period, I have to invest 2.5 hours. Sprint planning is the first thing that we do. What are we going to do in this next sprint? It's the very first event. And they recommend up to 8 hours for a 1-month sprint. Now, if you're doing a 2-week sprint, that means it's up to 4 hours. That's quite a bit of time, actually, and it's not what I recommend. But I want you to pay attention to what they have to say about it. We should be investing quite a bit of time into our sprint planning. Probably most of us aren't. The sprint review is up to 4 hours for a 1-month sprint. So I'm going to say up to 2 hours for a 2-week sprint. The sprint retrospective is this kind of odd thing. It's 3 hours. It's up to 3 hours. It doesn't have to be 3 hours, up to 3 hours. And that translates into 1.5 hours. And then what else do we have? We have this stuff called refinement. It's one of the places where teams really, I don't have a whole lot of time to go into it, but they really don't do a good job. And they certainly don't invest the time that's necessary to be successful if they're doing Scrum. One time somebody asked Sutherland Swaber, it's on the 10th anniversary, I believe, of Scrum itself. They said, how much should be invested in refinement? And they said 5 to 10%. So I can do math, not very well, but I think I can do this one. For a 2-week sprint, that means 4 to 8 hours. So I want you to look at just the suggested, and again, it's up to, but if you look at the up to suggestions of this, what do you have? You have quite a bit of time. You have 14 to 18 hours, up to 14 to 18 hours per sprint. Now, I want to ask you all a question. It's rhetorical because this isn't Zoom. We can't really be too interactive, though you can put some comments in the comment section if you wish. How many teams do you know invest 14 to 18 hours in the Scrum events and ceremony? The answer is probably 0. I've worked with hundreds of teams in my practice. I've never found a team that invested up to 14, 18 hours. So the question is, how much should they invest? And this is a question you should talk about with your team, especially when you're creating team working agreements and you're just starting out. What should you invest? I'm going to propose that 14 to 18 hours is too much. I propose with teams 10 hours. 10 hours is a starting point, right? I'm going to save you a little bit of time from what they do. You're probably going to do more than you used to do and you think you should do, et cetera, et cetera. Can we agree on 10 hours? Let's assume they do, because I'm going to run out of time here. What might it look like? Well, if I have 10 hours that I'm going to invest and I have 10 days in my sprint, Larry's feeble mind, and this is something I came up with many, many years ago, and I've actually done it. So this is not just theoretical. Larry's feeble mind says 10 divided by 10 is 1. What if we do 1 hour a day? What would it look like? So I came up with this. This is 1 contiguous hour per day for 10 days. And you can see that I've mapped onto this 15 minutes for the daily Scrum, which would happen first, and then 45 minutes of what I refer to sometimes as team time, and what it might look like and what are the events and ceremonies we might do during team time. Now, this is idealized, it's stylized, and not there's been very few teams that I've worked with that said, yeah, we're going to start out, we're going to do this, because you can always change it at the retrospective, but you got to have somewhere you start. So this is a good start. So we usually talk about this and say, okay, how does this look to you? If you agreed to 10 hours, here's 10 hours, here's what it might look like. Do we need to move things around? Do we need to change things? And we'll come up with a schedule that looks similar to this, but not exactly this, usually. but it's something that we can ensure that we are going to have the cadence and investment that's necessary for us to be successful. And that's about all I need to say on that. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about time techniques of cadence and investment. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about personal cadence and investment and why I think that's important and how you can actually operationalize that in your daily life. Because often people come to me and ask me, Larry, you're pretty organized. How do you get everything done? And I'll show you some of my organizational techniques. I'm not saying you have to do them. I'm just saying that you might be interested in them. And so that will be my big idea for next week. But my time is up, and we have a guest waiting in the green room. Shehla is there in the green room. I'm gonna bring her onto the stage. Shehla, how you doing today?
Hi, Larry. Great to be here, and excited to see some attendees who have joined us. So, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for agreeing to be with me today. We were talking earlier about I spend more time on LinkedIn than any human being should. There might be a few other folks who are in that boat, but I came across your profile and I thought you would make a good guest, and I reached out to you and you agreed to do that, and I appreciate you taking the time today. I know that we had you scheduled earlier. Well, we're going to schedule you earlier, but you were actually interviewing for a job, which is awesome. Very excited for you about that. One of the things I do want to say is that Shehla is looking for work currently. I know she's close to getting a position with some others, but now's a good time to reach out if you have a position for her. And if you do, these are the things that you need to know. She's a seasoned IT professional leader with over 20 years of experience in management consulting and IT service delivery. She has a unique talent for connecting with stakeholders on a personal level. She's going to talk a little bit about that today. And she effectively drives change and resolves intricate problems. And through that, she achieves some remarkable results, which I think is pretty awesome. And today you're going to talk a little bit about what? Remind us.
Yeah, so I'm going to put the thought that my big idea is before you step into somebody's shoes, you have to take off your own shoes. And just to put it into perspective, I'm putting that into the context of design thinking as product leaders, product owners, empathy, and how to build strong empathy. And that requires us to step into our users or customers' shoes, and hence, how do we do that?
So. Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to give you a little bit of time for that. So the way it works, I think you've seen this before, is I'm going to get out of your way and we'll bring up your presentation. If you see me come back, that's because you're running out of time. You have about 12 minutes, so we give you an extra couple minutes. For those of you who are paying attention and watching this, I appreciate all the comments in the comment section. We'll get to those afterwards. If you have any comments or questions for Shehla, you can put those in the comments, and we will talk about those after she's done. So without further ado, Shehla.
Great, thank you. All right, so going to the, as I mentioned, the presentation, or what I want to talk about, is empathy and design thinking. And the reason why this is important is because empathy is really the foundation of design thinking. It's a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it or have used it. It is a problem-solving methodology that is people-centered and focuses on the needs of the users rather than the technology solution, even though the technology solution is the tool to serve those needs of our clients, but it starts with the people and their needs first. So the question comes, how do we strengthen our empathy to understand our users' needs and for us to be successful as product owners and to build those solutions that serve our users? And that comes at first. The first step is to really understand where our users coming from and really to stepping into their shoes. And that's what empathy really is, if you really want to kind of put that into a visual perspective, is stepping into someone's shoes. What my experience over the years has taught me is that empathy, when we think about stepping into somebody's shoes, we really take that concept very at a high level. We don't really dig deep into it. And we underestimate the obstacles that we need to overcome before we truly step into someone's shoes. Before we even step into somebody's shoes, and if you really slow down and think about what you have to do, you have to take off your own shoes. And that was the aha moment for me as I was reflecting on this some time back. And it really is the core of the problem that we face when we are dealing with either clients or we're dealing with our teams, any kind of stakeholder relationship. We jump to to conclusions. We stay in our own comfort zone. So we really have to step out of that comfort zone that could be rooted in a multitude of things. It could be our old experiences, our personality traits, cultural differences, or generational differences. Not to say that those things don't serve us, but in terms, when it comes to understanding somebody's perspective, some of those perspectives, some of those experiences, our personality, etc., can be a hindrance, and we just need to be cognizant of it. And just to build on that, why is it important? And the key thing is to be objective, because unless we are objective, we are really not able to understand our users, and we cannot we really put ourselves at a disadvantage when trying to represent their needs as product leaders or product owners. Even if you're working as a technologist, as a software developer, you really have to keep that in mind. You have to put that user's hat on to really make sure that you're creating a product that will serve their needs. So how do you step out of that comfort zone? What are some of the steps that I, just from my understanding, my experience, has helped me, and I'd like to share some of those. I like to use the analogy of blind spots. And the blind spots are those mental shortcuts. A lot of times we use that that can distort our perceptions, because our generational, our previous experiences, our upbringing, they put us in a certain mindset, and we automatically do things, or we have certain thought processes that come quickly to us, even though they can be very beneficial to us in decision making. In certain circumstances, for example, this one where we're trying to really understand somebody else's perspective, they can be a hindrance. So those mental shortcuts, those perceptions, judgments, they can, we just need to be cognizant of those. So the first thing, as I said, just be aware of them and become very curious and intentional. So after really being aware, out of curiosity, and with no judgment, just ask lots of questions with the intent to understand and really slow down and reflect on the information that you're receiving. And that sometimes can be very challenging. I myself, from my own experience, it's very natural to jump to solutioning, and I have to stop myself and really just slow down and pay attention to my user, my client, really try to step into their shoes, right? So really, before I even do that, I have to be cognizant of what is preventing me from really understanding their perspective, or make sure that none of my judgments are getting in the way. So I know I wanted to be mindful of the time. That's the key. Those are some of the key things that I wanted to share. Essentially, empathy is the foundation and of design thinking, of creating new innovative products. And in order to be strong, strong to strengthen your empathy, you really have to get out of your comfort zone so that you can step into somebody's shoes. And before that, you have to take up your own. That's
That's
it.
super. Thank you, Shehla. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you being mindful of the time. We have a little bit of extra time then to also interact with each other and with the folks who are online, and we've got quite an active base of folks today, and I really appreciate that, because sometimes they're quiet, but they're quite loquacious today. So I want to catch up with some of the comments real quick, and some of the questions and comments that we might want to comment on. First, our good friend Ian is joining us from the cloud. I wanted to give a shout out to Ian. He's been a guest on this show before. We have somebody from Toronto, so hey, Relentless Learning is now international, so I like that. Thank you for joining us from Toronto. I hope it's not too cold up there. We've got Renee here. He said, hey, there's some real value in the VUCA MBA series. I appreciate that. There's a plug for that. And he's actually from from San Francisco, California. So that's my hometown. Getting to some other comments. Eddie says, talking about the teams and the cadence and investment, I think it really depends on the team and how mature they are, with not only process, but their technology. Shehla, do you want to speak to that? Or
Sure. Yeah, I've experienced that myself. I've been in agile shops where they're mature. We've had, and thank you for sharing that perspective, the cadence and the investments. Once you put that in place, it becomes really part and parcel of your culture, of your daily activities. And I've experienced that, and I've seen how efficient it can be. And I've been in places where there's that lack of maturity, and it's just clunky. You just cannot get that fluidity, and you lose a lot of time and creativity. So I agree. I think it's really depends on the team, maturity, and I think that goes to show the importance of training and really building that foundation, giving people that language, the same language, so that everyone understands what it means to have a sprint review, the backlog grooming, what it means, so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, and I just kind of pile on that. I agree. It does depend on the team. So there are some teams, when I present them with this information in this way, they say, "Wow, 14 to 18 hours. I didn't know." And we will do maybe an hour and a quarter per day, with 15 minutes for the daily, and then an hour for the time that we're together as a team starting out, because it's much different than what they've done before, and then that number can go down. My only thing, and there's another comment that's coming up, I can see the ones coming up that I'm going to bring up in a second. I worry that we'll get to a point where we say, I don't really need it, and then we stop going to the gym, or we go to the gym, but we only spend 15 minutes there around the water cooler watching everybody else work out, to strain the metaphor. So I think you have to kind of set a baseline of, okay, we're not going to go below this threshold. And the reason being, the interesting thing to me about it, it's a feedback mechanism. And sometimes you just don't have any feedback. But if you remove the feedback mechanism and you need it, you're in trouble. So a lot of times I refer to the daily scrum as like an insurance policy. There may not be earth-shattering things that happen, but there may be. And if I don't have it in place, guess what? I increase the risk. and Scrum and Agile in communication is just a way to mitigate risk. Anyway, moving on to the next one. Great information regarding cadence. I appreciate that. I'm a big believer in it as well. I'm gonna get to Michael Lyons. Michael and I have known each other for many, many years. He says, I tend to think these ceremonies and their time boxes can or should be reworked for remote teams. For example, it seems that daily scrum and refinement could be done via messenger, email, and chat. I have very strong opinions on this, but I'm going to let my guests speak to it first. So.
Yeah, I honestly believe in real time communication. I know we're in a remote world, but there is something that should be said about doing that visual, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that happens when you're speaking and you're seeing each other. A lot of times when people are on Zoom, they turn off their cameras. That's not optimal.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in being able to see each other and really understand. Communication is not just the words; it's body language. It's 80% of communication, even more is body language. So
Yeah, and I think this leads in a way as I'm thinking about it and processing it and figuring out how I want to respond to it. It leads way back to what you're talking about before with empathy. I think it's really hard to be empathetic with someone we don't see, and I think we see a lot of evidence in that in the real world today, quote unquote real world of social media. We have social media bullies. Why? Because they hide behind an anonymity, and it's much easier to not have empathy when we're not looking at each other,
True.
And we're kind of communicating past each other, which happens a lot on social media. It happens on Slack as well. We're kind of communicating past each other. It's not a real conversation, even though there's a thread. It's not always a rich conversation as well. My big thought on that one is, look, death and taxes. You don't have to do anything. If you find that that something you find works for you, great. But I also want to say that just because it works for you doesn't mean it's optimal for you. And that's a big problem for me. So there's a whole lot of things that go through my mind when I read a comment like this, because one, it depends. Everything's contextual. So anything I say, isn't 100% right. There's no objective truth to it. But the principle behind the ceremonies and the reason that we want to have them synchronous versus asynchronous is that feedback is critical to moving value through the system. And if we have asynchronous communication, your feedback channels actually expand. And the time that it takes you to actually come up with solutions and move things through your system can expand because things are waiting. They're waiting for a decision. They're waiting for further communication. They're waiting for something else. So while it says messenger or chat, and I think Slack is one of the things that people say, why can't we just do it over Slack? Well, you can, but it's going to be at the expense of increasing your cost of delay, and it's going to reduce your value. So is it optimal? No. Do we have to sometimes do it? Of course. I mean, how many folks work with people who are sleeping when you're awake and vice versa? It doesn't work out very well. It's why I'm not a big fan of having part of my team in the United States and part of my team halfway around the world. It just doesn't work well for communication. And when the communication is not solid, then not only do you have cost of delay issues, but you also have quality issues. So it's not optimal, would be my response to Michael. Though, try it. You can try it and see, but I think most of us can probably see philosophically how it might lead to potential problems. Teams like it, by the way. A lot of teams like it because we work with developers, and a lot of them are introverts, and they don't want to talk to anybody. But that doesn't mean that we should change everything just because we have introverts. I mean, anyway, I don't want to go on and on. Another comment from a LinkedIn user. I like the schedule. One thing missing: by the second week, the team is beginning the next sprint. I'm not sure the comment on there. One of the things that I didn't show in there because I had a limited time was the fact that all what I'm referring to as the refinement activities, they are done in advance of the next sprint. The refinement should not be for the things that you're currently doing. So if that's the nature of the question, I'm going to come back with my response is, if you're doing refinement on stuff that you're working on now, you're not doing it optimally. The refinement should be done in advance of the next sprint. And there's two refinements that I referred to in this, and I only did it briefly again because of time. One is you have backlog refinement, which is I need to take a look at the work in total. I need to, in Larry's world, you've heard me say this probably many times, people who are on this show who've been here before, you need to assess the value and a relative value and relative effort of the work that can be done on your backlog. You need to sequence it in a way that's going to deliver the most value in the shortest amount of time. That's Apke's golden rule. So you need to do those things, but you're doing those in advance of the next sprint. So the vast amount of time, if you look at that chart, about half of the time, if not more, is activities you're doing in advance of the next sprint. So if that's the question, then that's my response to it. Shehla, you have anything on your side that?
No, I completely agree. I think a lot of times, especially I've seen in places where the agile culture is not mature, is that you lose sight. You're not even looking at the backlog, and you're just reacting, and things are just being thrown into the sprint with, whatever either is the most urgent or whoever's screaming the most, and it's just chaotic. So just spending as much time as possible. I think that's where really the value comes in. The more time you put in the grooming, in the refinement, the the result is going to be a lot better, and your software developers are going to be happier because you're giving them a more well-groomed, estimated, instructions, or the stories are going to be a lot more elaborated.
Yeah, and just the one thing I add to it is I mentioned the fact that the one refinement activity I talk about is backlog refinement, which is in total. The second one is the PBIs themselves, which we tend to call the stories. So you can refer to it as story refinement. The way I recommend for that is we use BDD. And we write BDD scenarios. Those serve as our acceptance criteria. They also serve as our tests, regression tests over time. They can become our regression suite. It ensures the quality of the software. It ensures that people understand what they're doing. So if you haven't seen any of my talks on BDD, I encourage you to do that, because that's the other part of the refinement. Is once we have a sequence set or close to set for the next sprint, we can now talk in detail about them. So I kind of refer to it as inventory. Our backlog is inventory. What we're doing here is we're doing just-in-time inventory. We're just getting into detail on the things that we need to, which keep us from doing what we do in waterfall, which is having to get detail on everything before we move to the next thing. Good friend Charlie. Charlie works in accessibility, and he's been on the show as well, and I appreciate him. He's also here a lot, helping support my guests and myself, and hopefully getting some good things out of it. He says, outstanding perspective. This is for your presentation. This is super applicable to digital accessibility. Have you helped teams? How have you helped teams take off their shoes in the past? So do you have any examples that you can from real life that you can share with us without companies getting angry with us?
Thank you for that question, Charlie. Yeah, I mean, as a technologist and as a program leader in software, that's something that I'm having to do constantly, and it's a lot of conversation. It's really just sitting down and drawing pictures. Sometimes I just get on the whiteboard and just talk and draw pictures and really listen. I mean, it's more listening than talking. So hopefully that answers the question. It's that's the human element, right? You cannot replace that. And I think I'm kind of maybe stepping into the next question, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, you're reading ahead. So hopefully, Charlie, that answers your question. Hopefully, a little bit. Ian he is our resident AI, one of our resident AI experts, and he wants to talk about implementation of AI. What are the impacts from you? I've talked about it many times, so I'm going to sit back on the sidelines. But obviously, you're paying attention to what's going on with AI. So,
Yeah.
some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation going on about AI. People have used AI as a scare tactic. It's, hey, it's going to take away our jobs. But we all know who are working with technology that it's really helping us automate a lot of things that we're doing manually. You know, system optimization, monitoring, our systems, from a cloud optimization perspective or cyber security, things like that. But when it comes to really understanding our users and understanding each other, coming from that product owner or leader perspective, you cannot uh, you know put that into a bot cannot do what humans do, um, even though you can probably get ahead of some of the questions ahead of time, do a survey or have an application where a user can kind of um, build a prototype. You can build a prototype, get their interaction. I mean, there is a lot of work that can be that we can use AI for. I'm just thinking out loud, uh, because there's so much technology. Your the face, reading the face, your visual interaction with the screen. I mean, that's already happening, right? But it's really so black and white, and there's no human connection. I think we're missing that, and I think I really truly believe in um, keeping that human interaction strong, and use AI really to augment our ability to be good servants to the business, to serve the business well, and to serve our users well. That's my perspective.
Yeah, we got a few minutes left. I want to go to, there's a couple more comments in here, and I want to get to the LinkedIn user not talking about backlog grooming. We're finished dev. The team is reviewing the new user stories for the next sprint. That way, sprint planning is ready to go. I think you might have put that in before I got into that second part where I talk about the refinement of the PBIs or the stories themselves. I'm going to say, for sake of time, there's a link to my calendar. If I don't adequately answer it, or there's still some questions, I'd love to sit down and talk with you about that. I want to move on to a couple more comments, and I really appreciate the comments today. It was quite nice to have as many. Sometimes we don't have as many of those. One of the most important traits in a good agile person are people skills, and no AI will ever replace that. I'm assuming you agree with that comment.
I do. Thanks, Eduardo.
And then Ian says, thank you, Shehla. Welcome the opportunity to talk with you about your thoughts on AI and my experience with the HalBot project. Yeah, I think that you all should probably have a conversation offline.
I would love that. Yeah.
And the thing, your expertise to a certain degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, is professional services. So I think that we've talked a lot about how it is in Agile. We talk a lot about how it is in software development, but I think talking with Ian and talking about professional services and having that conversation is probably a pretty interesting conversation as well. I know that personally, just kind of interestingly enough, I found out that I could put a chat bot on my website, which it's not exactly professional services, but it does kind of support my website. And I trained it on my materials, my books and my blogs and everything. And so now I've got a little virtual Larry running around cyberspace on my website. So I encourage people to go to my website and ask Virtual Larry questions and see if Virtual Larry talks too much, like I do, or if actually it's a better version of me, or how it works. It's just kind of a fun experiment as far as I'm concerned, and hopefully it will provide
Yeah.
some support to people. Anyway, I'm looking at the time. There's always less time, but we want to keep it short because we want people to be able to join us, because we could probably talk for hours and hours. I want to thank you, Shehla, for joining me today. Any last words, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Well, it was a pleasure, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I loved all the questions. I'm on LinkedIn. Anybody who wants to connect with me and ask any questions. Also, I'm a leadership coach. I love working with emerging leaders, female leaders who are who want to move up into more, the executive suite. And I love working with them and helping them get earn their seats at the executive table. So that's another passion of mine. So
Excellent. Well, thank
thank
you
you
for
all.
that. And as I said earlier, she's interviewing for work. She's looking for jobs. So now's a good time to reach out to her and get her before somebody else does. So next week, we're going to have Marian Dragonoff. He's going to speak about some interesting stuff. I can't remember what it is. I don't have it in front of me right now. I'm going to talk about some personal things that you can do as far as organizing calendars and getting to something that I refer to as zero inbox. So if you're worried about those zero inbox people, I'm one of them. Show you how you can make that work. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Relentless Learning every Friday, or most Fridays at noon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.